Right, here we go. Okay. Yes, hello again. This time I'm talking about ISO 15489 and the revision of the standards, and just because I thought it's a thunderbolt rather than lightning, but so hopefully it will equally be brief and to the point and give you a lot of update. First of all, why she up again? Oh no. In this instance, it's because I am the IRMS rep on both British Standard Institute's Technical Committee for Archives and Records Management, and I'm also on the revision panel, or the review panel for the revision of ISO 15489. I came to the party kind of late on. It's been going a while. For those of you who are aware of it, we kind of feel that in the 80s it was actually going to come out. So I came to the party maybe about a year ago. So that's why I'm here. I'm talking about it. Just basically because I want you to do something. Could you really all just stand up for a second, please? No matter how tedious you might find this exercise. If anyone's taking notes sitting and I can't see them, get them up. Right, brilliant. Can you sit down if you hadn't heard about ISO 15489 until you knew you're coming to this event? Okay. Anybody else? Can you sit down if you were aware of ISO 15489 but you don't really know what's actually in it? Okay, cool. And for those of you remaining, could you sit down if you know what's in it but you've never really applied it or used it in practice within your organisation? This is a really interesting, okay, for the guys remaining standing, you'll have lots of brilliant input into the panel session this afternoon, and for those of you who are sitting, you will have lots of inspirational learning requirements that's going to get the panel talking. You may now sit down. I've done that in a couple of other sessions. It's always really interesting, particularly I guess today because a lot of you work in this area, and it raises issues about the value of the standard, and I think there's absolutely values of the standard, just the fact there is one, is big value, but of more of which in the discussion this afternoon, but thank you for that. Very quick kind of background. It's ancestral birth, so it came from Australia, but ultimately really based around the Australian standard for records management, and it was launched as an international standard in 2001. The key components, there's part one, and part one, if you like, is the framework, it's the policy, it's the high-level stuff, really, the principles, the policies, the major things you need to have, both in terms of the records themselves and also the systems in which you're managing them. Then you've got part two, and that's, if you like, the step towards how, okay, so this is a policy statement, this is the stuff we need to be trying to achieve, how are we going to do it? So that's the part two, the implementation guidelines. And then within British Standards Institute's stable of documentation, if you like, you have the guides, which I guess are even more practical implementation guidance. I don't know, again, maybe I won't make you stand up, you'll be pleased to hear. How many people have actually been aware of and used the practical guides that the BSI have done? They're really, the very few of you have you found them quite practical and useful. I think that they've been very, very good. So sometimes it's important not just to look at the high-level standard, which is obviously really important, but to see the other resources that have been developed, because quite often they're not exploited because people aren't aware of them. So that's, if you like, the kind of key suite, if you like. So I think roughly every 5 years within ISO, there's a sense obviously have to establish whether or not there's a need for a revision of a standard. Now, 5 years after ISO 15489 appeared, there was discussion, there was a sense that maybe there did need to be a revision, but there was no consensus on what that ought to be. So ultimately, the existing standard stayed. 2001 continues to be the current standard as it has been right up until this moment in time. So the next cycle comes around, and interesting, at that point there was a lot of consensus that said, well actually, this is all about the principles. That part one is about the principles. Has life really changed so much that the principles should be changing? There was some kind of consensus saying, oh, we don't need to review it. However, those more active in the committee persuaded those others that yes, there was a requirement for the revision, and then this new process kind of kicked in. And in 2012, a working group was established, which was working group that was going to develop the revision of the standard. I was thinking it's all wordy, and I like to do kind of car crash graphics. So this is a car crash graphic slide. Just to tell you that it's been a really interesting exercise for me being in the standards thing and seeing how well it works, and I have to say I think it's going to take me at least 10 years to get my head round so many aspects, not least of which are the abbreviations. I mean, it's like, does your head in. However, you get there in the end. So at the very core of our little kind of strange frisbee shape there, we have the actual editorial group. So they're actually writing the content. Then you have the working group, who are representatives of the member bodies of the ISO community, so within the UK, British Standards UK panel, of which I'm a member. So they are representing those member nations. So when they meet together, those member nations' views are put forward by them and decisions are made. So for example, if an initial draft comes out, everyone thinks it's hunky-dory, following review, brilliant, through it goes. Oh, if only that was not the way that this one happened to go. So there's this kind of reiterative process, and you'll see these kind of, I think I've those like Lego guys that I've got there in my little crowd. That's, I know nothing, but my lanes are way grown up. Yes, anyway, we talked about Methuselah earlier on. So that represents ultimately the public consultations. The actual draft didn't go to public consultation for some period of time, and I think there was a lot of people chanting a bit saying, when are we going to get our say? There was reasons for why there was a delay in that, because ultimately it's much better to get it right than to get it done quickly, and I think that's been the theme of the whole kind of revision process. So, some of the revision issues. One of the problems was that when the editorial group got together, they kind of didn't take a starting point of part one and say, right, let's look at this, what are the issues around this, where do we need to develop things? They kind of went from this is a whole new digital world, and that was kind of the route they went down. So it was very digital focused. Now, principles should not be about format. That should be absolutely not the name of the game. Absolutely, the implementation guidance, you say, right, in this circumstance, this is how we want to actually implement and comply with the standards, but not the principle part of itself. That was one of the big problems. It was very digital focused, although sometimes it was also too vague. There was a lot of issues around, do we just need a little slight tweak, or is it the total overhaul? There's also an international standards. When in France, I think only recently, they now actually have a word for records. Up until recently we didn't have that. It's a completely different concept of records and records management across cultures, across nations, across sectors. So it's quite hard to achieve that kind of pan-global kind of perspective. And I think the same issues are coming up with the EU legislation as well. There's an awful lot of disagreements among different parts of the world as to how this should be interpreted. One example is appraisal. Appraisal has been a big issue around this, the definition of it. And within the new standard, assuming we're going to get to that point, of which more later, it's a much broader definition. It's all about the whole kind of business process analysis side of things, rather than specific records appraisal. So there's been lots and lots of different debates around it. There was also things like the fact that they did a complete rewrite, trying to match the existing standard with the new standard, and there's a lot of just hard work involved in trying to compare them. The order of sections wasn't good. Some sections were extremely detailed, we were going into implementation, others were very, very, very vague. Also overlaps with other standards, and I think that will probably come up in the discussions we have this afternoon. And also things like terminology, because it's not accredited. You cannot get ISO accreditation for ISO 15489. You can't actually mandate things. So there were lots of, you shall do this. There ain't no question about it. It had to be shoulds. So a lot of just terminology, lots of inconsistencies. I've 10 minutes. Thunderbolt is more like a very slow range shower. I'll speed up and have a quick drink. One of the things that I think is important is for there to be kind of more participation and awareness of the standard. So one of the things that I did when I kind of joined up was to, well, first of all, I did a bit of blogging about it, and then when it came to the public consultation, created a LinkedIn group. Now, it wasn't as my role within BSI, it was independent of that, but it was to try and get kind of some kind of conversation out with that, so it didn't feel, I think even though it is not, it might feel like an ivory tower to people, and actually this is important to people, and the very fact we had that response when the stand-up sit down, I think points to that a little bit. Set up the revision LinkedIn group, We get a great coverage of 34 countries. Initially it was to get people to actually go and look at the consultation and actually participate in it. Hopefully we'll keep it going and use it to promote it, to develop ideas for implementing it, so it becomes a really practical tool rather than a kind of the ivory tower thing shining up there. Timescales are as much as I'm going to give you just now, because I could go on for an hour on that, and clearly you don't want that. So the editorial group got a working draft going. It was all a bit of a car crash, as I mentioned. There was no way that we could go anywhere near getting it to public consultation at that point. So lots of reviews of that, lots of comments back, and we got to committee draft stage in 2014. Even at that point, there was a sense it could not go out to public consultation. So we got a draft international standard, which is a bit like version control in documents within organisations that I have worked with. Finally, we got to the public consultation, which was from January to March 2015. Chuck up your hand if you actually either looked at the draft or indeed put in some comments. Brilliant, really good. So the public consultation was up to the end of March 2015, and then there was a member body ballot. And I can see how excited you are sitting in anticipation for me to put to the next slide. I like to overact, obviously. So member bodies met to view the public consultation, to take account of all the comments that people made in there. So it's really obviously important. There's no point in consultation, get public to do that. It was not actually given input into the actual process. And also, obviously, members of the member body committees had their own reviews of it. And each committee then had to make a decision. Would we be voting yes, go for it, or no, don't? And the UK was one of those that said no. Although it was vastly improved from what was initially produced, there was a lot of just editorial inconsistencies, and there were also some technical issues around there as well. And so we voted no, and what we recommended was, rather than going straight to publication if this is a yes, please take account of our comments, and if you do so, and you go to a final draft international standard, we'll go, aye, that's fine, thank you very much. So then we got to the member body ballot, so we said no. What do other member nations say? Well, actually, only 3 countries voted no, the rest voted yes. The other 2 were Italy and the Republic of Korea. Everybody else voted yes, but having said that, and the scary thing was, at that point, this could have gone to the new standards, and it just didn't have that quality feel to it, and we certainly within the UK felt we couldn't professionally put our names to that. So 100 pages of comments were brought in, and despite the fact 19 member countries said yes, many of the comments came from them too. And there was a meeting in Beijing of the working group when the decision was going to be made, what are we going to do about this? And the great thing is, and with Alan Shipman from the UK very much pushing the line that we were saying within the UK, they have agreed that we'll go to a final draft international standard, it will go to ballot, and assuming that ballot is yes, and we can really hope so, because they have viewed all those comments and agreed what should be going into the new draft, we should hopefully have a new 1549 standard, part 1, by the middle of next year. Hallelujah, and I just think it's way better than if we'd gone, as I say, rushed it out and it was not something, which is actually really, really important on a number of levels. And we want to last, probably, it will last at least another 10 years, it needs to be right. That's about part 1. Key changes, am I way past 10 minutes? Just keep going because we're wasting time. There are elements in there which are absolutely still the core principles, but it's the element of the approach and how things have changed. So there's more emphasis on metadata, because obviously the record, it's metadata, it's part of the record now, as it always was, but increasingly so. There's much more emphasis upon that. There's more emphasis about the whole changing work patterns, so it's like much less of the organisational boundaries and lots of partners working together, so there's great emphasis around that area. And also the sense of the record's value as an asset, information asset aspect of it as well. A number of different areas that are kind of key changes within it. I only probably have 1 minute left just now, so I'm not going into any more detail. Obviously, the panel session later, and also through the various things like LinkedIn and so on. We hope to keep getting more information out to everybody else so that it doesn't have to be a guessing game until the standard actually comes out. As far as part 2 is concerned, that's the guidance. Part 1 has been focused on, but obviously in the sense we need to have the guidance to implement what's in part 1, because really that's where the biggest changes are, how to actually make it happen in this much more kind of complex world that we live in. So it's going to be replaced, part 2, the current part 2 will be replaced by a number of guidance documents around different areas. They've agreed 2 particular ones to be the first 2 to be looked at. One is around this whole issue of appraisal, and the second is about systems development and implementation. And the first draft of those are to be prepared by April 2016, so that they can then be reviewed at the next meeting of the working group. There will be others, no doubt, to follow, and it might well be that PSI decides actually we'll do some of our own flavoured ones as well. That's eminently possible, I believe. And ultimately, the timescales here are probably 2 or 3 years, maybe it will take longer. And that is ISO 151 revision. Thanks very much.